Welcome, everyone. I'm Matt Leininger. I run the Center for Democracy Innovation at the National Civic League. The National Civic League is one of America's oldest good governance organizations, founded in 1894 by Teddy Roosevelt and Louis Brandeis and a number of other civic leaders of the day. The League has been helping to sustain, improve, update democracy for 120 years, and this is another chapter in that story, this healthy democracy map we're going to be talking about today. Just as a reminder, please keep yourself on mute if you're joining us so that we can minimize the background noise. The email about this webinar had a Halloween theme. Several people asked if we would all be wearing costumes. Sorry, we are not, but we will try to be as engaging as we can to walk you through this new resource. Let me tell you a little bit about the people who've been part of this effort from the beginning. Our team includes my colleague, Carolyn Lukensmeyer, who has had a distinguished career running things like America Speaks, National Institute for Civil Discourse, many other things. Carolyn and I have worked together in many different contexts over the years. Christina Bekvar, who runs the Bridge Alliance, has also been an instrumental part of this, especially in terms of the data architecture and creating a lot of the features that you see on the map now. My colleague, Nick Vlahos, his research skills and data skills. He's been in the engine room with Christina on a lot of these things. He's been extremely helpful as well. Also, earlier on in our work together, Hala Harik Hayes was an important part of the team. She interviewed a whole bunch of community, national civic leaders about this map and did other things as well. And then Rachel Fursch was our original kind of data architect and project kind of manager and architect, and she's an extremely instrumental as well. We also had a whole lot of help from a lot of you and a lot of other people too. I will say more about that in a little bit. I think what we're going to do here today, and I'm going to let Carolyn take it away just a second, we just want to introduce the map to you and show it to you, show what it can do, what it can't do. We want some questions and reactions and comments from you. We should have an opportunity for at least a couple of you to be live and kind of verbally giving your questions or comments to the rest of the group, but please feel free to use the chat starting now, putting questions or comments about any of this. We'll be kind of harvesting a lot of those responses, and we'll try to address them both by members of the team and also some of the panel members we've got joining us today, who you'll hear more about in a second. Great. Carolyn, why don't you take it away?
Be happy to. Thank you, Matt. First of all, I want to do a real expression of gratitude to all of you who've joined us today. For many of you, you've been with us from the beginning, and only by your generous and unique collaborations have we managed to get along as far as we are. And for all of those of you who are joining us for the first time, I hope something during this hour and 15 minutes evokes a desire for you to get engaged. And if that happens, please just put a note in the chat with how to reach you, and we'll be back in touch sometime in the next couple of weeks, we promise. I actually want to also give a debt of gratitude and a special acknowledgement to our National Board of Advisors. Danielle Allen at Harvard University. In fact, her next op-ed in the Washington Post will be about the map. And Yuval Nevin at the American Enterprise Institute will also be writing about the map and has been extraordinarily helpful. And Arkan Fung at the Kennedy School and Peter Levine at Tufts, who were extraordinary leaders in the first wave of deliberative democracy in the 80s and 1990s. Mm-hmm. I think I'm right that Peter was actually the first person to take a stab at mapping the field. So that said, I want to share with you our vision for this map. There is no question.
Uh-oh. You're on mute, Carolyn.
Yeah.
Whole time I've been talking, I've been on mute?
No, just last 10 seconds.
No idea how that happened. I didn't think. Anyway, so the vision for this. What we know is that there is work in the arena of protecting democracy, evolving democracy, building bridges around the cultural issues. This work has exploded in the last 10 years. And yet there hasn't been an effort to get a picture of everything that's going on. Now we understand it'll take us huge amount of work, almost like a Wikipedia style, to ever get close to all the work that's being done. But our hope, we had 4 audiences in mind dominantly, and the vision relates to each of those audiences. First of all, is the American public. You don't need to go there yet, Rebecca, sorry. First of all is the American public. And because each of us have been presenting this in different audiences, we actually know that when people hear that we already have found 10,000 organizations in the country, it gives them hope. It inspires them. And for some number of ordinary Americans, they take the first step to get more active. Second group, equally important. The National Civic League has a big footprint with community leaders, both elected officials and civil servants. And many of them are already reaching out to say, hey, I heard about what happened in Bend, Oregon, or I heard about what's about to happen in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Nothing like that's going on in my city. Can you help me through the map come up with the resources that I might bring to my community to actually catch up with where the public is around a desire to be engaged in real problem solving and real policy making at home? The next audience, and the one that we think will actually use it the most right away, are all of the leaders of the organizations who are in the map and the leaders of organizations who aren't yet on the map but will be on the map. They want to find other people who are doing similar work to them. Or what we've seen in some communities is there's a Building Bridges group that understands, as they've been listening to people in their community, that community is really ready to take on the issue of electoral safety, safety at the polls. So how does the Building Bridges group get connected to the electoral safety group? So the collaboration, the ability to amplify each other's work. In some instances, a discovery that we should actually merge. We're both spending money on accountants, lawyers, human resources people. If we actually merged, more of our scarce resources could actually go to our programmatic policy initiative work and not so much infrastructure work. So we know that is a huge audience that will use this map widely immediately. The other thing that's well understood, you can read it in the Chronicle of Philanthropy, you can get quotes from the heads of almost every major institutional philanthropy in the country. The work of democracy, reform, renovation, protection, whatever you want to call it, is way underfunded in this country. And we believe that as the whole picture is seen, the potential for additional funding coming to the field is possible. And particularly when a given community gets focused on a problem they want to solve, it's a perfect opportunity for a community foundation in that city to link to a national foundation who cares about that issue. So more collaboration amongst funders about strategic investments. So we've tried to be transparent from the very beginning. I hope that helps you understand the vision. That slide, Rebecca, give it back to me for a minute. We don't want to spend much time on process today. And those of you who want more detail, Rebecca will put in a link in the chat where you have a whole webinar dealing with this. I only want to talk about the process part of this slide. We started in April of 2023, a strategy face-to-face session here in Washington, D.C., with 25 leaders from all of these categories of democracy work to help define what is the whole field conceptually. What are all the different kinds of work being done? National service, bridge building, volunteerism in the world of civics, civic education, structural issues. Then we interviewed beyond those 25, 50 additional experts working in this field to flush out our understanding of how people deeply embedded in the work view it. We then developed collaborations with all kinds of organizations, practitioners, many of you who we acknowledged earlier who are on this webinar today. Then the big push of work was on data collection. We started with a list of 4,000 from Candid, and went from there using databases, public records, scraping data wherever we could. We will continue that process. We decided to go with 10 states because we're at a point where we could actually verify the data we have for those 10 states. We'll roll out 10 more 2 weeks from now, 10 more 2 weeks later, until we get to 50. So I think with that background, what I'd like to do, and we'll have a chance to come back if something I've said raised a question that I didn't go on to respond to, just put it in the chat or we'll have a Q&A session. But I want to make a shift back to Matt, who will say a few words about how to take a look at this work, both the map and the visualizations, what to expect and what isn't there yet.
Thank you. So as you will see, we have 10 states, and the idea is to go in kind of sets of 10. In a couple weeks, we'll launch another 10 states worth of data, 10 after that, 10 after that, and so on. As you'll see, there's searchability to it. There's some limited kind of comparability of data that Christina is going to walk you through. It does not allow you at this point to do things like downloading. You can't download all the groups in Arkansas, for example, or all the electoral reform groups or things like that. That's something we want to have happen in the future, but you can't do that yet. So it's something that will give you enable you to visualize who's where in a particular place and what sorts of things. It will not give the financial data. If people who are kind of grant seekers who want more about the data about particular funders, in particular, the U.S. Democracy Hub created by Democracy Funders Network is the better place to go. We actually direct people to that location on the map, on the front page of the map itself, if that's what they want. So there's a lot of things that you can get, and there are other things that will be coming in the future. The work, just to kind of to describe how this happens and our ability to kind of roll out another 10 states at a time, we end up getting a whole bunch of, we start with a whole bunch of organizations for a state, say 200 organizations. A lot of them come from the old Canada data file and originally from the IRS 990 files. As many of you know, IRS 990 data is automatically 2 years out of date. So the groups that it lists are often no longer in existence, or they've moved and so the address is wrong, or they have a new website. So there's a whole lot of winnowing at that stage to kind of figure out what's still in existence, where they are, and so on. We also received a whole lot of organizations from many of you, including very large kind of data contributions from AmeriCorps, Legal Women Voters, and other groups. So thank you for those. So basically, we have to kind of, for each state, we have to kind of winnow through and check all of the data that we have. We also have been working with state reviewers who are playing a really critical role, people who understand the civic landscape in their state and who can say, you're missing, these 12 groups, or what about this one? I'm not sure this one belongs according to your criteria. That sort of work is really critical for us. And so we'll start out with perhaps 200, go down to 100 through the winning phase, come back up to 140. So the numbers kind of fluctuate a lot as we kind of grapple with all of this data. So in the future, we do not only hope to have, obviously, all 50 states, we'll be doing that at the same level of functionality you're going to see today, but we will be trying to kind of introduce other sorts of functions, otherwise where you can download or manipulate or search or compare the data across states or across sectors, those sorts of things. In all of this, we've had a lot of help, and we can certainly use more of it. This has been a labor of love for us. It's a whole lot of institutional resources from the National Civic League that have been poured into this individually, the time of the people involved in the mapping team, and also the contributions, critical support that we've been given by the Konar Family Foundation and the Gottesman Family Foundation as we worked on this project. We also have been terrific, had a great partnership with Brightly, which is the firm which has kind of designed the portal that you see now. The things that we could use help on are three sorts of things. One, reviewing the data itself, looking at the organizations in your state, figuring out who we've missed, who we maybe shouldn't have included, all those sorts of things. Please, if you've got background noise, please mute yourself so so we can kind of keep going here. And as Carolyn mentioned, Wikipedia, Participedia, resources like that grew to the usefulness they have today because of people saying, I'm going to take ownership of some aspect of this work. I know something about Arkansas. I know something about electoral reform organizations or whatever it is, and contributing that expertise by helping us kind of review the data that we have. Another thing we have received help on and would like more is people who are helping us figure out new features, figure out new visualizations of the data, figure out how do we kind of quickly and easily add email addresses for a given set of organizations and so on and so forth. So we would love to have as much of that help as we can. And the simplest thing one can do is if you want to have information on your organization or another one, there's a form right there in the portal. You click on it. It allows you to kind of fill in some of those fields right for us. And that goes right into the data set. So this is a free resource. It's a public good. It will always be free. All of it is free. So we ask for your help in helping to kind of steward it and grow it and make it more and more useful. Christina, I think you're going to actually show us the map.
Yes. Okay. I'm going to share a quick look at the visualizations and different ways that you can investigate this data. So on our portal, the first tool you have is our geographic map. So this is the first 10 states. And as we grow and we add 10 states and 10 states more, this will update and you'll be able to see how many we have done to date. This one is, for now, this is a way that you can zoom in, look geographically. So if you're living in a certain part of a state and you're looking at what's going on in that area, you can click on a dot that you find there and it'll give you the start of the information that we've collected on this organization. So for example, here's a Chamber of Commerce, the city it's located in. It gives you the key organizational categories, so you can just get a little bit of a sense for it. But if you want to do a little bit more, you click here. This will take you to their website. That's one of the curation criteria that we had as we've gone through these, is to ensure that they have, if possible, a website so that you can do, take the next bit of investigation on yourself after we've shown you geographics and general organizational category. So this is the first way that you can search. As you scroll down, we're developing tabbed maps and visualizations that kind of give you different ways to search for that information. So this one, we got a lot of feedback on, I'd love to be able to search. And while we're working on adding functionality to our primary map, this one gives you an ability to search the same organizations that are found in our primary geographic map, but if you know the name, but you're not sure where they're at, or you're not sure a lot of it, and you just know part of a name. So for this one, we have League of Women Voters, as Matt said, gave us their location. So if you start typing all of the ones that are in the database so far, it'll show you some options, and then you can click on the one you were looking for. If you just know the name, for example, if you want to just do Fix Democracy First, once you click on it, you'll be able to see the address, category of work, goals, contact, and email, phone, and website. We don't always have all of this for every entry, but we have included everything that we have and everything we can. And again, if you want to search for your own organization and say, hey, this isn't complete, right beneath this, there's a way that you can click to submit a form with updated information, additional information. If you know another organization, it's not yours, but you just know they're not on the map and you just want to add it, we'd love that. So thank you. So this is one way that you can search. And as we grow, you'll be able to see which states have been completed and click on it to know how many groups have been mapped in that state. And so this is one way, in addition to the geographic map. We have a data explorer that gives us a little bit of an ability. It shows the different categories. So if you want to look at just all organizations, you can look at all organizations. If you'd like to look by state, you can look by state, and then it'll show you, here's the organizations in each state. If you want to get specific and say, I want a civic association, and I want a civic association in Washington, and you just want to look, you can kind of click around, but at least it narrows a little bit what you're looking for, so you're not just searching randomly. So this, again, we hope to grow with more criteria and more ways to filter and show you the data. This is another way of looking at the same data that is in the primary map. And then our final and still a little bit beta, I would say, is our networks and coalitions tab. This one has currently just national networks and coalitions. We hope to be able to roll out state-based networks and coalitions in the future. And currently we have it so that if an organization, it's just to see where they sit in the greater movement, in the greater ecosystem of healthy democracy organizations. So, Citizen Connect is one that deals with all different types. So it's a very large organization with structural reform, bridging, civic education. Some are a little bit more like Listen First Coalition is primarily on bridging and connecting across differences, but there's a lot of overlap. The darker the circle and larger, the more that they are involved in multiple organizational networks. So Unite America, it'll tell you where it sits and that it's part of multiple alliances. Again, this is just a different way of showing that information that may or may not be helpful to you, but we want to give you as many options as possible. So with that first look, I think I'll turn it back over to Matt.
No, I think Nick is actually coming in
Nick.
here talking.
Sorry, Nick.
So at this point, we're gonna, if there's anyone that has questions, you can feel free to put them in the chat, or alternatively, just raise your hand, and then we'll invite you to ask your question. In the meantime, there was one question in there about research, and so I circulated a link in the chat there. Basically, the interviews that we have collated, we have, which informed a two-step methodology. So there's a link that talks a little bit about that. But to my knowledge, we haven't necessarily produced a public-facing report on the themes that we generated from those interviews. But I suppose there's, because that data is there, it might be something that we might consider, developing in the near future.
Nick, there's a question that just came in about organizations that aren't place-based, and it's true that basically all of the organizations in the data set, they're pinned according to their physical address. That's not necessarily where they work. Obviously, when we released DC, as in that 10 states or 9 states in DC release, we'll have a whole lot of national organizations, but that won't, so looking at the geography is only one way of kind of capturing kind of the scope of their work. Some of the other kind of functionality that Christina was talking about that we'll be adding as we go will be more helpful as far as understanding, who's doing what where.
There's also a question in here about the rolling out of the 10 states at a time and the timeline. And so I think Carolyn had just mentioned there that we're looking towards a couple weeks rollout of the next 10 states, and then that sort of interval towards till we get to the full set of states. There's a question here about how can an organization update their information if there are any changes. So we're encouraging folks to click on the submission form. So we have the submission form on the website. We also have it on this webinar chat. And if you want to just reach out, we can do that. But the submission form would be the strongest way to do that, so we can gather a lot more nuanced information within that submission form.
One other thing I didn't mention before is obviously there's things that we can do, in the engine room to help people now. So if people want a download of all the organizations in Arkansas or all the service organizations in the Northeast or whatever, that is the sort of thing that we can do. We can provide you a spreadsheet or a CSV file or whatever. So that is something that people should feel free to contact us directly about, and we think that would be an important use of our time, and also it would be helpful to us in the sense of kind of learning more about how people want to use this data and the kinds of functions we want to add to it as we go.
I'd like to add something. Carolyn Fry put a note in the chat that she'd be willing to help us find organizations in North Carolina. And what we've understood, that is exactly the kind of help we need. because so much of this good work is happening at the community level, and you don't know about it if you're not part of that larger community. So if any of the rest of you on this particular webinar have a state that you know that you probably could add organizations or are willing to help us find people in your state that could do that, please add your name in the chat, and we will definitely be in touch.
Any further questions before we turn it over?
Okay, I guess I'll pick it up. One of the things we thought that would be really fun for us, as well as all of you today, is to invite people who've already begun to use the map, and to invite them from different kinds of perspectives about the map and share their experience with it. So I'm going to take just a minute to introduce all three panelists quickly, and then we'll throw out a question and they will begin to dialogue. On your left on the screen, you see Cindy Black, who is the Executive Director of Fix Democracy First in Washington State. And I'd just like to say, in the time that I've grown to know Cindy over these last year and a half or so, Cindy is one extraordinary networker. And it's also important for you to know that she's really works on passing pro-democracy legislation, both at the state level and national level, and took a major step in Washington to be the 18th state to call for a constitutional amendment to overthrow Citizens United. Next, you'll see Daryl Holliday, a journalist who has been on the forefront of understanding what needs to happen in the country since journalism, particularly print, has been threatened so much by the way in which advertising moved to the internet. Daryl co-founded City Bureau, which is a Pulitzer Prize-winning media lab based on Chicago's South Side. One of the things that I love about what Daryl does is a boot camp, training young people, obviously often people of color, in their own community to begin to have the journalism skills to go to that school board meeting and report on it, go to that city council meeting and report on it. Functions that major media has really completely let go of. Currently, Daryl is on a journey to really push, I'm not sure what noun I want to use, but to push all of us to get further down the road to understanding the intersection between all of our democracy reform work and fundamentally, if we don't have fact-based, trusted local journalism, we can't really make it as a democracy. We're thrilled to have Daryl with us here today. You know, when I was talking about our vision, I'm sure you all noticed that my voice caught a bit when I was describing how important we think this map can be to the public, and particularly to the public taking a step to get engaged. One of the first people to send a message to us about the map and interest in the map was our third panelist, Dave Wenzel, who earlier, before he retired, was a finance and strategy executive in Fortune 500 companies and lives in a community in Southern Illinois. He is now dedicating himself to work on democracy reform, particularly focused on nonpartisan primaries paired with majority winner general election systems. Daryl is an example of a very accomplished person in his original profession who is now on this journey. We also know that it's essential to get ordinary Americans who don't come from that kind of portfolio, but who've lived lives in which they understand if democracy doesn't work, their opportunities are profoundly limited. So please join me in welcoming the panel. And I'm going to ask the first question and really toss it open. If we can put it back live, thank you. What in your professional or community, what are the kinds of challenges that you face that you already know the map can help you work on them? Cindy, it looks like we popped you up, so I guess I'll ask you to respond first.
Yes. Well, first of all, thank you, Carolyn, and the whole team for putting this together. When I first heard about it, I was very excited because in the work that we do, pro-democracy work and civic engagement, um, it's really important for us to connect and network with others. Working in a silo or an island does not help our work at all. We really need to be able to reach out, find other people that are connected to the issues that we care about, and that's moving democracy forward, whether it's voting rights and access, money in elections, voting reform, how we vote, civic engagement, civics education, all of those things are so important to the work that we do to ensure that we have a strong democracy and create a real, true democracy where everybody's represented. So I think this mapping project is so essential for us to be able to find those groups and people that are interested in this and working together and building new networks and coalitions.
Thank you. Please, Dave, you look like number one, you're affirming her comment, but what would you like to add to that?
Well, thanks, Carolyn. Yeah, I think I'm 2 years into retirement and trying to focus on these issues. And the number one observation in those 2 years was, one, there are a lot of organizations and it's hard to find them. But two, as you find them, then you start to see these linkages and you actually start to get a little bit confused and a little disappointed about the amount of work that is duplicated in various places. So one of the things I'm interested in, as I heard about the map, the reason I sent an email in was to be helpful in the process of making sure the organizations that are really very closely aligned are better aware of each other and hopefully collaborating more effectively, to the point of what you said earlier. Maybe at some point we join forces and reduce the amount of administration around all of this. I will say that an unexpected thing, as I looked at the map, I hadn't really thought about it because I've been focused more on national and state level campaigns. Just seeing the map though and the dots sort of inspires one to say why. And we don't have Illinois on the map yet, but when we do, Illinois and Missouri, because I live in the metro east of St. Louis, it'll be very interesting to see those
People move
dots. And I
fast and
think
some
the
people move
instinct
slow.
will.
But this public statement seemed like it's
Keep going, keep going.
I think the instinct will be to want to, one, know those dots in our area very well, but maybe more importantly, want to populate that map now that we're seeing the kinds of organizations that we're seeing all around the country, to your point earlier.
Perfect, perfect. Daryl.
Of course, yeah. Thanks for having me here. So I steward a group of journalists and civic media makers who prioritize historic democracy, community engagement, and civic health in their work. This cohort is largely nonprofit, largely non-commercial, and really eager to be connected to the wider universe of aligned people and organizations working in sort of these adjacent civic sectors: government, education, community organizing, advocacy. So my response is really twofold here. I am interested in putting the civic media cohort on the map. I think there's a lot of folks doing this work that call it different things, but it really is any organization that produces fact-based information that enables people to respond to collective needs. That's usually by enhancing local coordination, problem solving, public accountability, kind of this. So it isn't just newsrooms. It's a lot of different folks who I think are taking information systems very seriously where they live. I would say it's not a very new space in local journalism, but it is undergoing a sort of revival right now that I think will be interesting to a lot of folks here who are working in the democracy space at large. But secondly, I'm really hoping the map can help that group make these connections and help establish civic media as a sector within local news that pulls from the traditions, the DNA of journalism, but is more ecosystem-minded, more participatory, and more community-driven. So that's two ways in which I hope the map can help my work and help us find new folks to be in alliances with.
I was really blessed, as you know, Daryl, a couple of years ago to get involved in taking a look at the local media across the country, and was really taken aback at how little link had previously existed between the other kinds of democracy work with the civic media work. So I think, yes, you're going to be amazing to help us get all those organizations into this map. And then I've been thinking about it as we need to do some events, in particular, almost regions, in which the leaders of the local media, civic media, and all these other things meet each other and begin to understand how collaboration could actually increase everyone's reach.
Absolutely.
So you partly responded to what I wanted to focus on next, but I think I'm going to ask it anyway and see if we can take it a little bit deeper. We want this map to foster collaboration, to create higher impact from the resources that are invested. And I'm wondering, as you think about the geography that you're in, if you already are having some interesting ideas about how not just to do idea sharing across these organizations, but to really begin to create strategic alignments for how you invest your resources. We all know to truly collaborate actually takes, number one, there has to be a lot of trust, and it takes more time at the front end than me doing with my organization what we really know how to do. So I know this is a tough question, but if any strands of thoughts you've begun to have about it, we'd love to hear. And particularly how the map could help do that.
Well, I'm happy to jump in there because I've already seen how this map can help the work that we're doing in the state on a couple of different projects. One is we're building a coalition of coalitions that are working in the state on pro-democracy reform and coming together to see how we can consolidate some of our resources and be more effective with that. And then the other project we're working on is developing a Washington Democracy Hub. That's part of the intersection intermovement project that we want to be able to bring together organizations that may have not worked together before, maybe even don't even know that we exist, to come together to have conversations, ways to do trainings across the state, local intersections where we can build little local hubs where people can talk together to really network on a variety of different levels across the state. And not just across the state, but to me, it's also interesting to see what other states are doing, because that gives us ideas about how we can improve the work that we're doing in Washington State as well as on a national level. So I really see that this project has many ways to bring people and groups together.
Thank you.
Yeah, Carolyn, I'd like to add something there because I had an exchange with Matt on email this morning because I was playing with the tool and I clicked on one thing and the underneath it was actually, from my perspective, glancing at it, instantly, I said, well, that's just a company. And Matt explained that there were some criteria about if companies were doing certain things in the area of volunteer and whatnot, that was how they were included. And it really got me thinking about the intersection between the business and corporate communities and all of this work. And I think one thing that, I'm really glad to know that it's that broad. I do think it'll be really critical to have the ability to sort so that you're seeing those kinds of folks as a group and other folks. But you've got a lot of CEOs out there right now who are terrified to do anything politically, even if it's nonpartisan, because even the most nonpartisan thing is viewed as partisan by somebody, and they will be accused of, being woke or whatever other version of things. I think the opportunity for those folks and their community outreach farms and whatnot, to look at this information and to really see the breadth of the types of organizations will allow them to see places where they can both collaborate and then frankly fund safely enough that they can help, because these are organizations that really believe that democracy working is the only way that the business community works in the long term. But they're a little bit paralyzed right now, and I'm hoping the map could be a tool to help some of those organizations find the places where they can play.
Thank you, Dave. It brings to mind for me that in all of my work at America Speaks and the National Institute for Civil Discourse, we found that in communities where this kind of work could be sustained, it's because there was cross-sector leadership. The community had come to understand democracy isn't just the purview of the government. Democracy isn't just the purview of education. That if we're going to make this work in our community, business has to be at the table, the nonprofits have to be at the table, and particularly, we don't going to spend any time on how we got here, but the place we are currently in which so much about our fundamental norms and values of what it takes to be a democratic society are under serious threat now more than ever, particularly at the community level. All of the institutions in the community have to have the capacity to work together for democratic outcomes. Yeah, please stay in touch with us about that, because I think in many ways the business community is the most difficult to reach out to for exactly the kind of threat they are currently experiencing. Thank you. Daryl, did you want to add something here?
I'll add a couple of things, although I think the previous co-panelists here named all the good ones. Briefly, I don't want to skip too far past just, I think, the pure value of helping folks find each other. I think that's huge. I think this map could support some of the more like emergent cross-sector communities like Democracy Notes, but also bring new folks in some of the more long-standing coalitions that have emerged in the last decades. You mentioned trust, of course, I think is fundamental to all of this, but once you have that, I think the exchange of intel on funding, on collaborations, policies that are emerging that could be replicated across states, reducing redundancy, mergers. I think there's, once you kind of build that trust about folks, I think there's a lot more that opens up. And then lastly, I think the network analysis that's emerging on the site is really interesting. Just being able to see where that critical mass is forming, figure out where you might want to join. But I'm looking forward to seeing that aspect of the site build out. It reminds me of Little Sis and some of the other organizations that do a really good network analysis.
Yeah, we're excited about that too. And we know there's complications in the visualization of it because it gets very full very quickly. But we've actually already seen, for example, this great organization called Students Learn, Students Vote, which is massive across the country, but very few of their members were linked to any of the other democracy work. Having once seen the map, there have been motivation to actually get their existing core workers linked into other networks. So we're too pretty excited about that and hope we can figure out the visualization so it's easy to track. Let me bring up one last.
Carolyn, can I just piggyback on that just for a second, because it's partly a plea for help, but both of what Daryl and Dave just said are important things to point out here. One is we really want to have all kinds of things, efforts, organizations, groups, programs that are doing democracy strengthening groups, democracy strengthening work. And only some of them are nonprofits. Some of them are government offices or programs, a youth city council, a participatory budgeting project. Some of them are, university-based centers or institutes. Some of them are for-profits, like companies that do a whole lot of community service work or something else like that. We want all those sorts of things. The nonprofits are in some ways easier to gather because you're starting with the IRS file. They all have to file 990s. So it's more a problem of taking this enormous batch of data, winnowing it down to the groups that fit the criteria. For the nonprofits, we have to start from the ground up and find out what are the civic media, collaboratives, all across the country that we can kind of name and find an address for, find a URL, those sorts of things. So we really do need more of that kind of expertise that you have and that other people on this call have to help us kind of build out those different areas and to be able to kind of point to not just, the city of Lancaster as an entity. That's not meaningful. It's the city of Lancaster's project that is doing some democracy strengthening work. It's not a radio station in Tennessee. It's the radio station's kind of civic media thing where they're hosting forums in the community, whatever it is that they're doing, working with documenters or whatever. That's what we need to kind of point to, partly so that when people are reporting as documenters, on civic life, in the public meetings in their communities, they're not only able to kind of transcribe and report on what officials are saying, what the meetings are coming to, but also point to other alternatives in terms of ways to do politics, ways to do civic life, other alternatives that are exemplified by all these different pins, on the map in their community.
So I did note in the chat that Victoria Hattersley mentioned Rotary and Chamber of Commerce, and I would just give a shout out. National Chamber of Commerce has started a project following the National Spelling Bee. It's called the National Civic Bee. And they ran it as a pilot 2 years ago. And this year, they're in 28 states running this in a way that huge numbers of young people are involved in. And when I was leading the National Institute for Civil Discourse, one of the organizations that had the broadest reach into communities to do bridge building conversations was National Rotary. So there are clearly existing examples of private entities or national associations getting deeply into this work. But mostly so far, they're not connected or known about by a large enough. To me, one of the things that touches me the most is if this narrative actually could take hold across the country, it would be a totally different psychological space for Americans who at the moment are frightened, who feel like there's no way to come back, who feel like there's no way to actually shift the needle toward more civility, toward more connection across our differences. And there clearly is. It's just not sufficiently known about. I'm going to ask one last question. I think we have time. We touched on this a little bit, but I'm going to take it a step further. And Dave, you really zeroed in on it. We are right now at a time in which there are a significant number of threats to our democracy. National polls show that most people are very concerned, very anxious that there's likely to be violence around the election, no matter what the outcome of the election is. So this time I am going to ask you to think about either your geographic community or your professional community and see what comes up about, are there any ways you think the map could now assist communities in responding to and mobilizing against the current threats to democracy?
I'll jump in and start. I think yes is the simple question. I think this mapping project could be very instrumental in addressing some of that polarization, misinformation that we're experiencing in the country right now. I'm actually very hopeful because a few years ago, we haven't had conversations like this about how do we bring people together. And there's more conversations about how to bring back independent media. Daryl is here talking about journalism, and the loss of independent local media has been a big problem. But now a lot of people are talking about it. There's programs to look at how do we can support local media, how can we bring that back, as well as bridging. We have groups like Braver Angels across the country that are talking about that, Living Room Conversations, and a variety of other organizations that are talking about this. And for someone that's worked in the field for a while, we hadn't really had those conversations. So we have this real opportunity right now, because people are feeling this way, to come together and find ways to resolve some of these issues and bring back those things that are missing in the communities, whether it's local media, whether it's discussing how do we solve local problems? Things like citizen assemblies are having a real moment right now in conversations about that. So I see there's opportunity that we can use this map for across many different areas.
Thank you.
Yeah, I don't know that I have anything specific to add to that, Carolyn. The power, at least with regard to the urgency of current threats, I do think is the power of seeing how many people are spending some meaningful part of their time worried about it, which I do think emboldens people to speak up, to get involved, and to participate. And then secondly, the other, maybe more importantly, and I was just seeing something on the chat about firepower in this thing. It probably does need to be used as quickly as it can be to bring key audiences, and not just folks that are doing the same work together, but that coordinated effort between the different types of groups, and some way for those groups to spend some quality time brainstorming about how they might do something as a unit together that would, get a larger audience, a bigger bang more quickly.
I think there's a lot of potential in that, Dave, but where, just to be specific, where in a given community, where the team that's been working on bridge building gets connected to the team that's been worked on ranked choice voting, gets connected to the team that's been training ordinary people to do journalists' work to get public processes covered. Actually, that combination coming together and saying, okay, what's the next step for our community? Daryl, do you want to add anything?
Sure. I see a bit of this in the chat, and I fully agree. I don't want to reduce the challenge, but I also think the challenge of language is very real. People aren't sure what words to use. They worry about getting words or ideas wrong. I think helping us align on the language of how we describe this moment and this movement, could help align our theory of change, like beyond our organizations, a wider sector field theory of change, which reminds me of the PACE fund. I was going to put this in the comment, but I'll just say it now that I'm already talking. It reminds me of the PACE funders report that came out recently, the Civic Language Perception Project. I thought that was great, and more work to do. I'm sure they might say the same thing, but there's something in the language that is tricky but very important. I think this work could dig at. And I think lastly, I think the need for a mindset shift, I feel, is also very real. I think people feel alone and overwhelmed, but there is like a revival happening, which I think people on this call probably feel, right? There's a lot of energy, I think, in the space to do something. And making that more visible and real for people, I think, could go a long way to bring people into this work that we're doing.
I think that's very well said. It reminds me of a comment I saw on LinkedIn from Bobby Milstein when he saw the map today or yesterday, when he talked about that when our systems fail us, which clearly at this point we're dealing with several huge systems that have failed us. What it falls back on in a democracy is we the people. So we the people are stepping up, but we need ways to make that more visible. We need ways to make that more touchable by more people. And I think that's what you're speaking to, Daryl and Dave and Cindy. Yes, this map, along with several other things that are happening, is another portal into how we can understand that we are already doing more together than we know, and that we can actually even enhance that significantly to really do mind shift, behavior shift, and eventually systems change. Please join me in thanking the panelists for being with us today. You've done a great job, and we really are looking forward to continuing the work. And I'm going to turn it back over to Matt, which I think we have a little bit more time for some open Q&A with the whole group that's on this webinar.
Yeah,
Thanks.
please. Sorry. Thank you, Carolyn. Yeah, please do put things in the chat or put your hand up There have been, as you guys have been reacting to, several comments in the last few minutes about this whole question of language and concepts behind this, and the PACE Civic Language Project, which has been super helpful to all of us. Yes, these are enormous challenges. The language is unclear. In most cases, it's not shared. The ideas underneath the language, underneath those terms, are also not clear. We tried as best we could, and we had a lot of help from people at the beginning of this effort. We did all those interviews I mentioned, a strategy session at one point. So a lot of people, including some of you, helped us kind of refine some of these terms and ideas, and we came out of that with 12 basic categories for the field. We then decided we need to go further and deeper with that. And as we were looking at mission statements for all these organizations in the field, we came up with these much more granular goals with 57 or so goals that are more specific. And those are trying to be responsive to what people are saying they're doing on their mission statements of their websites. So it's difficult, it's nuanced work. We're trying to use AI actually in the categorization of this. Christina's done this a bit, and able to kind of actually assign a category to every organization, at least in our 10 states. So you can at least get one term, which hopefully encompasses what they're doing. But this is something where we really want input from organizations themselves, because, what your address is that's not in most cases, that's an objective fact. Your goals are subjective. They're for you to say what they are. And so we're hoping that as people fill out these forms, not only are we hoping to get the URLs and the addresses and things like that, we want to get people's own sense of what their organization is trying to do, how they think of their own work, how it's connected to other organizations, other networks, other groups. It's really important stuff. Any other things here that people want to raise their hand? Steve Cliff asks, can a group own their listing and update it over time? No, not yet. That's a whole nother level of complexity of this resource. We're not there yet. We would like to get there. So the idea would be that, eventually you'll be able to kind of have an account essentially and say, you're directly editing, your information about your group. We're a ways away from that stage, but that would be a very nice step to be able to get to. I think Rashawn from NCDD and Alyssa from Better Together, your comments are about the language and the goals here. That I think one of you mentioned funding as well. I think this whole question about communication and being able to kind of be clear about what joins us together across these many different fields and subfields, that's key for funding, and being able to kind of make the case for why this work is valuable to investors and foundations and so on.
Well, and Matt,
go ahead.
I don't think we should be shy about acknowledging that in order to take the next steps of introducing interactivity, of doing the other layers on the network maps that we want to do, this project is also in need of funding.
Sure.
So we're definitely open to talking with any of you who have ideas for joint funding. But the bottom line is the whole field, I'm sure there's no one on this call who feels like they have sufficient funding. But you also know what it means to come to that point in a particular initiative, that to actually go the next steps, one of the requirements is additional funding.
And that's for adding things like data, for functionality, for new features, and it's also for communicating about this work so that people know it's there, that people who can really benefit by this map and the other resources and the organizations themselves are able to find it. Just looking here. Any other?
Yeah, and if anybody had, just use the hand raise function.
Sure.
If anybody who's got a question that you'd like to get an immediate response to.
Alyssa, go for it.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm extremely excited about this project. This is just, for me, this is a great step towards breaking down silos and, again, getting us all connected. And I specifically wanted to address and definitely the language element is so important. If we're all approaching funders with different language, or approaching citizens or the government, it just becomes very confusing. And so I also wanted to highlight that Better Together America is looking at doing collective fundraising, and with, you know, again, not just grassroots, not just national organizations, but also grassroots. So I put my email in there, and I'd love to hear from you guys.
Awesome. Anybody else?
I want to acknowledge that I appreciate how many of you in chat have offered your help about adding organizations state by state. I think the model that, and we've mentioned this before, but I'm going to elaborate on for a minute. I've always wondered how Wikipedia stays so up to date and seems pretty much to have accurate information. Well, we're actually communicating with them to learn more about how they did that. And that's how we see keeping this map building over time, is a community of democracy workers that own this collective resource and help us keep it ever up to date. Because the worst thing that could happen, all this effort goes out and we don't actually have the capacity to keep it evergreen.
We someone in the chat is saying suggested a main contact for each state. That's something like that. I think would be an interesting point in the future. We're interested not only in the state reviewers, many people have served in that way already, but also having webinars for as we release data in a particular state, having a webinar at some point for people, you know, specifically in that state to talk about the pins they see or the ones that need to be added or how they want to use the resource. That's a great idea. Well, let me thank you all for your time today. Thank you all for the help that you have given us so far, the help that you hopefully will give us in the future, the work we might do together. We hope that this resource, by showing you collectively on the map, is showing you all of us in all the different fields and all the different ways we're contributing, that in itself that is powerful, and that there are many different ways we can use this data. We can use these visualizations to kind of make our messages clearer and more connected, and to do all kinds of other great collaborative work in the future. So thank you so much for today. We will be sending the recording, both the verbal stuff and also the chat will go out to you today, along with any other resources that have come up that we think you might need. And please do contact us directly. In fact, I think, Rebecca, you might have a slide for this, right? Anyway, there are email addresses. ncl@ncl.org is a easy fallback if you don't have other ones, but individually, I think she's putting it up now. There we go. Yes, individually, there's some other email addresses you can reach out to us individually. The team, the mapping team, has its own email address, so please feel free to try that one as well. And look forward to continuing talking with you, many of you, as we do more together on this resource and to help make democracy stronger in America. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks very much, everyone.